Coming up on this Tuesday edition of Newsline at noon, Pope Francis stresses the need to overcome political differences to address human suffering as he returns to the Vatican after his 5-day trip to Korea. South Korea details plans for inter-Korean economic cooperation, holding out hope for dialogue with Pyongyang despite its recent hostile rhetoric against Seoul. First, federal authorities in the US step up efforts to restore calm to the rioted town of Ferguson. But President Obama cautions against the use of National Guard troops deployed there. These stories and more on Newsline at noon.
It's noon Tuesday, August 19th here in Korea. Thanks for tuning in. Live from Seoul, I'm Ju.
It's very good to have you with us. I'm Mark Broom. From his thoughts on the Sewol-ho ferry accident to the Korean victims of Japan's wartime sex slavery and even to the ongoing conflict in Iraq, Pope Francis answered reporters' questions on Monday on his flight back home from his historic 5-day trip to Korea.
And in particular, talking about the bereaved families of the ferry disaster, the Pope said he couldn't maintain a neutral stance in the face of their agony and suffering. Connie Lee has more.
As promised, on his flight back to Rome from Korea, Pope Francis held one last press conference. Wearing the yellow ribbon, a symbol of the Sewol-ho ferry sinking, the Pope was asked if he was concerned that his meeting with the relatives of the victims would be misinterpreted politically. To that, Pope Francis was clear that in times like this, it's not about being neutral.
After half a day of wearing it, someone came close to me and said, "It is better to remove it. You should be neutral." But listen, one cannot be neutral about human pain. I responded in that way. That's how I felt.
He was also not neutral about the Korean victims of Japan's wartime sexual slavery. He said the women, whom he met at a mass on his final day in Korea on Monday, retain their dignity to this day, even though they were exploited so cruelly. On the two Koreas, the Pope is praying and says he hopes the two countries will be reunited, stating that a divided country causes suffering.
There are many relatives that cannot come together. That's suffering, but it's suffering of a country divided.
The Pope also spoke on other issues outside Korea, even commenting on the conflict in Iraq, saying the unjust aggressor against the minorities there, including Christians, must be stopped. He made clear, though, that he doesn't mean to make war. And with China, the Pope stated he's willing to go there even tomorrow, but only on one condition.
We respect the Chinese people. The Vatican Church only asks for liberty for its task, for its work there. There's no other condition.
While a trip to China is to be determined, the Pope's next trip to Albania is set for next month. Connie Lee, Arirang News.
The Pope's visit to Korea left a sizable impression not just on the Korean people, but also on the economy.
That's right, and as our Song Ji-son reports, the Pope Francis effect, as it's being called, is being felt across a number of economic sectors.
Although the Pope himself stressed that putting the dignity of mankind is more important than any economic gains, his visit most definitely boosted domestic spending, which was dented by the Sewol-ho ferry disaster 4 months ago. The Seoul-based Hyundai Research Institute estimates Pope Francis' 5-day visit was worth some 500 billion won, or around $500 million US, in the form of brand publicity for the country and spending on accommodations, transportation, and other areas. That's equivalent to how much the Brazilian government estimated the Pope's visit brought to their country last year, and a similar total Korea saw during the APEC meeting held in the southern port city of Busan in 2005. The products used by the Pope had a direct impact on raising the brand awareness of several Korean companies, including Kia Motors and its compact Soul model, which was used by the Pope during his visit. Haechilo Seoksu mineral water also got a boost for keeping hundreds of thousands of Catholics hydrated during last Saturday's beatification ceremony in central Seoul. The religious sanctuaries the Pope visited are also anticipating a rise in visitors. But pundits say prompt measures must follow to label the shrines as benchmark tourist points. Korea's tourism organization says the stops on the Pope's visit will be developed into a travel program dubbed the Healing Pilgrimage Trail. 송지선, Arirang News.
And in other news, South Korea had wanted to sit down for high-level talks with North Korea this Tuesday, but Seoul's offer went unanswered. All indications are that Seoul will continue efforts to improve inter-Korean ties, such as proposing extended economic projects with the North, but experts say not much is likely to change until next month at the earliest. Hwang Sung-hee tells us why.
South Korea's much-anticipated high-level talks with North Korea on Tuesday failed to take place as the offer went unanswered by Pyongyang. Despite the North's apparent rejection for dialogue, the South Korean government laid out detailed plans for fresh inter-Korean economic cooperation. A report submitted to the National Assembly by the Unification Ministry on Monday contains reconstruction projects for the highway that connects the border town of Kaesong to Pyongyang and the railway that links Kaesong to the northern city of Sinuiju. The report also hinted at a possible lifting of sanctions, saying Seoul would be open to resuming trade and existing business with the North and pursuing new ventures, depending on the state of inter-Korean ties. Seoul imposed heavy economic sanctions on Pyongyang in 2010, after North Korea's torpedo attack on a South Korean warship. Speaking before lawmakers Monday, Unification Minister Ryu Gil-jae made clear these sanctions will not be lifted until Pyongyang comes to the negotiating table. But experts have ruled out the possibility of any dialogue before joint military exercises between Seoul and Washington end next Friday. They say new momentum in inter-Korean relations may come in September, when a large North Korean delegation will participate in the Incheon Asian Games, raising hopes that sports diplomacy could be more effective than political outreach. Hwang Sung-hee, Arirang News.
But North Korean provocations, as we've seen in its recent string of missile launches, could be another variable in inter-Korean relations. On the day of the Pope's arrival in Seoul last week, Pyongyang has fired 5 short-range rockets into the East Sea, and we're now learning more about them. New analysis suggests they were a new type of tactical missile that can be launched from multiple locations and could potentially reach deep into South Korean territory. Kim Min-ji has the details.
North Korea is believed to have developed a new form of tactical missile that could pose a new threat on the Korean peninsula. According to joint analysis by South Korea and the United States, the North has fired 5 of the new rockets last Thursday into the East Sea. A source within South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff says the new model appears to be different from the North's existing KN-02 missiles, or those fired from the 300mm rocket launcher, but maintains their advantages with a range of 200 kilometers and a warhead weight of 500 kilograms. The source said the new rocket, likely to be called the KN-10, is believed to use solid fuel and can be launched from a movable launcher. If fired from the military demarcation line separating the North and South, it could reach the central parts of South Korea.
It can load many more explosives. It is a threat because it does not require advanced preparation to launch and can be fired at any time.
North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is also believed to have purchased a new personal plane. Made in Ukraine, the Antonov 148 can seat up to 80 people, and unlike his previous plane, which was fitted with tables, this one looks more like a regular passenger jet. The plane, worth some $30 million, shows Kim Jong-un's penchant for not just spending, but for traveling by air, unlike his father, who was notoriously afraid of flying. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Now, South Korean President Park Geun-hye says managing national crises isn't just about countering security threats, but also about dealing with natural disasters and large-scale accidents. At a cabinet meeting on the second day of a joint military drills with the United States, President Park said the training exercises, which are mostly focused on countering North Korea's Threats should also include how to respond to various natural disasters, terrorist attacks and fires. A premium has been placed on public safety in Korea since the Sewol-ho ferry accident in April killed more than 300 people, stressing that proper training for emergency situations saves lives and protects assets. President Park asked the heads of government ministries and agencies to make sure the nation is well prepared for any and all dangers. Korea's National Assembly hasn't passed a single piece of legislation in more than 3 months as the nation's main political parties battle over the details of a special bill that's designed to uncover the causes of April's ferry disaster. If they can't settle their differences today, in fact, they're going to be looking at the possibility of a much longer impasse, which could have a number of very serious implications. Our Ji Myung-gil reports.
As they've been for months now, the nation's two main political parties remain at loggerheads over the passage of a special Sewol-ho ferry bill, with the main point of contention being who should have the right to choose a special counsel for the investigation. With the current parliamentary session ending Tuesday, lawmakers have till the end of the day to come to terms on an agreement. Failure to do so could have political implications. For the ruling Saenuri Party, which says giving the committee investigative powers would undermine Korea's entire legal system, they'd face criticism for not being able to move forward with state affairs despite a parliamentary majority. For the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy, interim chief Park Young-sung faces a prospect of intense backlash over first conceding earlier this month to the ruling party on the investigative power issue, but then backtracking on the agreement. The Sewol-ho bill is holding Parliament back from its normal functions with a series of economic stimulus bills in limbo. In fact, the National Assembly didn't pass a single piece of legislation in May, June, or July, despite extraordinary parliamentary sessions, all due to their failure to pass the ferry bill. Demanding action and a full and impartial investigation into the disaster, some of the ferry victims' families are on a hunger strike. They also want to sit down for face-to-face talks with President Park Geun-hye to explain their position. Ji Myung-gil, Arirang News.
Now, a woman living in Canada has revealed that her mother and aunt were forced into sexual slavery by the Japanese military during World War II. Asia Policy Point, which is a non-profit research organization based in the US, says Dutch-Canadian Tia Biesenberger van der Wal had written to them with details about what her mother had to endure at the hands of Japanese troops. It says that in 1944, the Japanese military took her family members to a concentration camp located on Indonesia's Java Island. Her mother's sister even attempted suicide while in this concentration camp, but her mother saved the sister, stopped her committing suicide. Biesenberger van der Wal said she learned of the experiences back in 2009 when a younger sister of her mother told her about it. Her mother, who passed away around 10 years ago, never told her daughter about what had really happened to her.
Stay up to date on the latest news out of Korea. Connecting to our team of reporters about the issues that matter to Korea. On air, on your mobile, online. Find out more about Korea on Newsline at Noon with Mark Broom and Jin-ju.
I'm Jin-ju.
Market researcher, strategy analytics said Thursday that LG Electronics brought in about 11.
Korea's producer prices continued on their upward trend for the second straight month in July, but the pace was very slow. The Bank of Korea said Tuesday that producer prices inched up 0.2% last month from the previous year. July's index also marked a slight rise of 0.1% from a month earlier. The central bank attributed the bump to service prices that rose nearly 2% on year. And earlier this month, the central bank cut the key rate to 2.25%, citing low inflationary pressures. The Korean government will make sure prices won't shoot up ahead of Chuseok, Korea's biggest national holiday that falls in early September this year. The finance ministry says the checks will take place on 28 daily necessities every day starting Wednesday and will continue until September 5th, which is just 2 days before the 4-day holiday. Product prices to be monitored include apples, beef, and rice. The government also plans to provide financial support, including loans worth $18.5 billion to small and medium-sized enterprises in the run-up to Chuseok. Now, on to the recent trend on the nation's trade front. Korea's trade volume with Japan has been slumping in recent years, largely to the strength of the Korean won and Seoul's move to diversify its trading partnerships. Kim Jian has this report.
Trade volume between Korea and Japan has dropped to its lowest level this year since 2009, totaling $43 billion in the first half. Korea's exports to Japan, ranging from smartphones and semiconductors to steel, dropped more than 5% from the same period last year. The same goes for imports from Japan, which was reduced by 12%. The Korea International Trade Association attributes the overall drop in trade between the two countries to Japan's attempt to reduce its amount of imports in order to increase domestic demand.
The Japanese government raised its consumption taxes in April and is increasingly trying to nationalize its component and material industry after they were severely damaged by an earthquake disaster in March 2011.
Although Korea's trade deficit to Japan is shrinking, the researchers said the effect may not be entirely positive, since it's a result from a decrease in Korea's imports rather than an increase to its exports. He adds the trade volume between the two could drop even further as Korea is increasingly diversifying trade with other emerging economies. It's also being fueled by the low price competitiveness of Korean products to that of Japan's as the value of the Korean won continues to strengthen against the weakening Japanese yen. Kim Jian, Arirang News.
Now, a new study has found that Korea's global companies are only a quarter as competitive as their Japanese counterparts. The study, which was released on Monday by the Federation of Korean Industries, looked at a variety of elements surrounding the two countries. One example, Japan easily outstrips Korea in terms of export items with top global market share at 231. Korea trails very far behind with just 64. In regards to the number of Fortune 500 companies, Japan has 57, while Korea only has 17. In Thomson & Reuters' top 100 global innovators, there were 28 Japanese companies, while there were only 3 Korean firms. Korea's heavy reliance on raw materials and parts from overseas means its consumption and investment create less value within the country compared to that seen in the US or even Japan. A report released by the Japan-based Institute of Developing Economics shows the amount of value added locally in Korea was also lower than that of China, but higher than that seen in Taiwan and most countries in Southeast Asia. For every $1,000 spent, locally created value amounted to $757 in Korea. That's lower than the $877 in Japan and the $864 in the US, but higher than the $670 in Taiwan. This all according to that report. Now, despite Korean government efforts to breathe fresh life into the country's stock and real estate markets through a series of stimulus programs, many investors are still thinking long and hard, really, about where to get the best returns on their money. Data from the Bank of Korea shows that liquid assets, which are those that can be quickly converted into cash, reached a record high of over $720 billion as of the end of June. This figure has been on the rise since May, after dropping for 2 straight months in March and April. Pundits say investors are having a hard time finding trustworthy investments, while interest rates at local banks sit at the mid 2% level, the lowest in years.
And time now for a look through the international headlines for falling this Tuesday afternoon. For that, we turn to our Eunice Kim standing by at the news center.
Eunice, new protests are ongoing in the U.S. town of Ferguson at this hour as the curfew we saw earlier this week was replaced by the presence now of the National Guard.
That's right, Mark. It's the highest card Missouri State Governor Jay Nixon has activated since declaring a state of emergency this past weekend in that region. And to give you some perspective, the last time the Guard was deployed for a civil unrest was back in 1992 for the Los Angeles riots. Our Son Jung-in recaps for us the events leading up to tonight's demonstrations in Ferguson.
As angry, violent protests continued in the St. Louis suburb of Ferguson, Missouri Governor Jay Nixon ordered the state's National Guard troops to be deployed to try to restore calm and quell days of rioting spurred by the fatal shooting of unarmed black teenager Michael Brown by a white police officer. With the National Guard patrolling the streets, Nixon lifted the curfew of the past 2 nights in the town, where protesters are demanding that Officer Darren Wilson be held accountable for shooting Brown. U.S. President Barack Obama addressed the situation and urged the governor to ensure troops were involved in a limited and appropriate way.
There's no excuse for excessive force by police or any action that denies people the right to protest peacefully. Let me call once again for us to seek some understanding rather than simply holler at each other. Let's seek to heal rather than to wound each other.
Obama also said Attorney General Eric Holder would travel to Ferguson to meet with Department of Justice officials working the case to call for an end to unrest in the town. This as preliminary results from a private autopsy commissioned by Brown's family found that the teen was shot at least 6 times, including twice in the head. The results apparently contradict testimonies by eyewitnesses that Brown was shot in the back, as all the bullet wounds were to the front of the body. The prosecutor's office in St. Louis County, which has jurisdiction in the case, said a grand jury could begin hearing evidence against Wilson as soon as Wednesday to determine if he will be charged with the shooting. Son Jung-in, Arirang News.
And moving over to Iraq now, Kurdish forces say they have gained full control of the Mosul Dam, which has been the center of a fierce battle with Islamic State militants for the past 2 days. Earlier, Iraq's defense ministry had said forces had liberated a large part of the Mosul Dam with the help of U.S. airstrikes, which the Pentagon said had hit some 90 targets in and around the area. U.S. President Barack Obama said the development, or he called the development a major step forward in the battle against Islamic State militants. An Iraqi army spokesman said the militants have fled to a region near the south of the complex, hiding in homes and offices on the premises. The ceasefire that has set the scene for indirect negotiations between Israeli and Palestinian factions has been extended by 24 hours. The announcement came on the 4th round of peace talks came minutes before the temporary truce was to expire. Head of the Palestinian delegation, Azam al-Ahmad, said the extension would be good for 1 day and 1 day only, warning the circle of violence would continue if an agreement was not reached within the next day. An unnamed Palestinian negotiator told the Associated Press that draft proposals for a long-term truce had been exchanged and would be addressed during the 24-hour period. And officials in the West African state of Liberia are desperately searching for the Ebola patients who left their quarantine center when it was attacked by a group of youths wielding clubs and yelling out, "There is no Ebola." Liberia's information minister said 17 patients had returned to their communities, correcting earlier claims that all were transferred to another medical facility. Search teams through the West Point slum has so far failed to produce results. Neighboring country Guinea said it believed some of the sick Liberians had already crossed its border, officially closed 10 days ago. The AFP reports ministers are considering sealing off the country's largest slum, home to some 75,000 people.
The rain we are seeing nationwide should taper off as we go through the day, and most regions shouldn't see showers in the afternoon, but heavy rain will fall again starting tonight. Up to 200 millimeters of additional rain is on the way for the east and some of the southern parts, while 10 to 60 millimeters of precipitation is expected for the upper provinces, including here in Seoul. And with the sky staying mostly overcast across the nation, the daytime high will be similar to yesterday, hovering in the mid-20s. So let's take a closer look at those temperatures. The high in the capital and Daegu will rise to 25, while Busan will peak at 27. And for other regions, Jeju Island should be getting up to 27, and Daejeon will top out at 25, while Mount Keungang hits at 17. Well, it looks like we'll see on and off rain all this week. A lot of rain is expected on Thursday, and it seems like temperatures will be remaining on the mid-20s till the end of the week. Well, that's all for me today, and back to you guys in the studio.
Well, that does it for now. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow.
Thank you for watching. Goodbye.